Maria Delgado was not your typical cleaning lady. With her sharp intuition and keen observation skills, she had a secret life as an undercover FBI agent, tasked with protecting high-profile individuals from threats lurking in the shadows. Today was no different. As she meticulously dusted the ornate furniture in the opulent mansion of millionaire Richard Lawson, her mind raced with the urgency of her mission. Richard was a man of influence, a successful entrepreneur known for his philanthropic ventures and powerful connections. Yet unbeknownst to him, he was entangled in a web of corruption that could jeopardize not only his life, but the lives of those around him. Maria had been assigned to protect him after intelligence reports suggested that he was a target for a notorious crime syndicate involved in money laundering and political manipulation. As Maria cleaned, her eyes scanned the room, noting every detail. The way the light caught the edges of the expensive artwork, the subtle tension in the air, the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the hallway. She felt a chill run down her spine. Something was off. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her supervisor at the FBI. "Be vigilant. Reports indicate a possible threat tonight." Her heart raced. She had to act quickly. That night, Maria decided to take matters into her own hands. After finishing her cleaning duties, she slipped out of the mansion unnoticed and made her way to a nearby cafe. Over a cup of coffee, she drafted a plan. She couldn't just rely on the usual surveillance. She needed to ensure Richard's safety personally. The next morning, Maria returned to the mansion with a sense of purpose. She approached Richard, who was in his study, poring over documents. "Mr. Lawson," she began, her voice steady yet urgent, "I need to talk to you about your security." Richard looked up, his expression one of curiosity, mixed with concern. "What's this about, Maria?" "There's been information suggesting that your life might be in danger," she replied, carefully choosing her words. "I think it would be wise to have some security personnel discreetly placed around the house." Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You're serious? What makes you think that?" Maria took a deep breath, recalling the intelligence reports and her own instincts. "I can't go into details, but there are people who would benefit from seeing you harmed. I believe they're planning something soon." Richard leaned back in his chair, contemplating her words. "If you think it's necessary, then we should proceed. I trust your judgment." With a nod, Maria felt a surge of relief wash over her. They quickly organized to have security disguised as staff members, ensuring that Richard would remain oblivious to the heightened risks around him. As she watched the security team set up, a sense of foreboding washed over her. Later that evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maria received an unexpected letter. Its envelope was unmarked, the handwriting elegant but unfamiliar. Inside, a single line sent shivers down her spine. "You cannot protect him forever." The warning echoed in her mind, fueling her determination to uncover the truth. As the night enveloped the mansion, Maria stood by the window, watching the shadows dance in the moonlight. Outside, a luxury car pulled into the driveway, its headlights piercing the darkness. The car's presence felt ominous, and Maria's instincts kicked into high gear. She had to stay alert. Richard's life depended on her, and she was ready to confront whatever threat awaited them. The next day began with an air of tension that settled over Richard Lawson's mansion. Maria awoke early, her mind buzzing with the warning she had received the previous evening. She glanced out the window, watching as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. But the beauty of the morning did little to soothe her nerves. After a quick breakfast, Maria decided to take a different approach to her undercover role. Instead of merely cleaning, she intended to keep a close watch on Richard, ensuring that no threats slipped through the cracks. With her FBI training in mind, she transformed her routine into a surveillance mission, blending in seamlessly as she moved about the house. Maria made her way to the kitchen, where Richard was sipping his morning coffee. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson," she greeted him with a smile, masking her inner turmoil. "How did you sleep?" "Morning, Maria. I slept well, thanks." Richard replied, his gaze drifting toward the newspaper spread out on the table. Have you seen the headlines today? It seems like the corruption scandal is escalating. Maria's heart sank at his words. The scandal was precisely why she was there, and it made her all the more determined to protect him. Yes, I read about it. It's troubling, she replied, choosing her words carefully. But you shouldn't worry. Let's focus on the things that matter right now. Richard nodded, seemingly reassured, and returned to his coffee. Maria felt a flicker of guilt for the deception, but she knew it was necessary for his safety. As she continued her chores, her senses heightened. She could hear the faint hum of the security team as they quietly patrolled the grounds. Everything seemed normal, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just out of sight. In the late morning, Richard received a phone call that interrupted the fragile peace. Maria watched as he stepped into his study, closing the door behind him. Curiosity piqued. She moved closer, pretending to organize the bookshelves just outside the room. She could hear his voice, tense and concerned, as he discussed a business deal gone wrong. I don't care about the consequences. I need those documents secured now, Richard said, his tone brokering no argument. Maria's heart raced. This wasn't just about him. It was a potential trigger for the very threats they were trying to avoid. After the call ended, Richard stepped back into the kitchen, his brow furrowed with worry. Maria seized the moment to press him. Is everything all right, Mr. Lawson? It's just some complications with a merger, he replied, his eyes betraying his unease. But I'll handle it. Maria wanted to probe deeper, but she sensed he needed space to process. Instead, she decided to gather more information herself. She quickly formulated a plan to discreetly explore Richard's study while he was distracted. After lunch, Maria slipped into the study, her heart pounding. She scanned the room, searching for any sign of the documents Richard had mentioned. Her eyes landed on a briefcase tucked under the desk. She knelt down, trying to catch her breath, and opened it cautiously. Inside were papers detailing transactions and contracts, information that could put Richard in jeopardy if it fell into the wrong hands. Just then, she heard a noise outside. Maria's instincts kicked in, and she quickly closed the briefcase, slipping it back under the desk as she darted to the window. Peering outside, she saw a sleek, black car parked at the end of the driveway. A figure emerged, their face obscured by a hat and sunglasses. Panic surged through her. Who were they? What did they want? Maria's mind raced as she realized the threat was closer than she had anticipated. With no time to lose, she needed to inform Richard and ensure the security team was on high alert. Rushing out of the study, Maria confronted Richard. We have a problem. I just saw someone suspicious outside. We need to be on guard. Richard's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. What do you mean? Did they look dangerous? I can't be sure, but we can't take any chances. I want you to stay close to me for now, she urged, her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside her. As Richard nodded, Maria felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was not only protecting him from an external threat, she was also diving deeper into a world of danger she never anticipated. The shadows were beginning to close in, and she had to stay one step ahead to keep Richard safe. The tension inside Richard's mansion was palpable as Maria prepared for the day ahead. She had managed to alert the security team about the suspicious figure, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling deep within her. The world outside felt charged, like a storm ready to break, and she knew she had to remain vigilant. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Maria slipped into her routine, keeping her eyes peeled for any signs of danger. The security personnel had increased their presence around the house, and Maria felt a sense of reassurance as she moved about, dusting the shelves and polishing the silverware. Yet, her thoughts were consumed by the briefcase she had discovered in Richard's study. What secrets did those documents hold? And how would they impact their current situation? After completing her chores, Maria decided to confront Richard about the briefcase. They needed to discuss the implications of the documents and how they could potentially expose him to more danger. She found him in the living room, his eyes glued to his phone, scrolling through news articles about the corruption scandal. "Mr. Lawson, we need to talk," she said, trying to catch his attention. He looked up, a hint of frustration in his eyes. "Can it wait, Maria? I'm trying to stay updated on what's happening," he replied, his voice slightly strained. "No, it can't," Maria insisted, crossing her arms. "I saw someone suspicious outside yesterday, and it's likely related to the documents in your study. We need to take this seriously." Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, what do you want to know?" "Those papers, they could put you at risk. You need to tell me everything you know about the merger and why it's causing such trouble," Maria urged, her eyes locking onto his, willing him to understand the gravity of the situation. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Fine. There are some people involved who don't play by the rules. They're willing to do anything to protect their interests, and I fear that they might see me as a threat." Maria's stomach churned. "We need to come up with a plan. If they view you as a threat, they might try to silence you." Richard's expression hardened. "I won't back down. I have worked too hard for this company to let them take it away from me." As Richard's determination shone through, Maria admired his resolve. But she also knew that this was not a fight he could win alone. "I understand, but we must approach this with caution. I can help, but you need to trust me." Richard nodded, slowly coming around to her perspective. "All right, let's do it your way. What do you suggest?" "First, we need to secure the briefcase. I'll keep it with me, and I want to review those documents. We need to know what we're dealing with," Maria replied. "And we should increase our security measures." Richard agreed, and as they made their way back to the study, Maria felt a surge of adrenaline. This was her territory, and she was ready to play her part. Together, they opened the briefcase, revealing pages filled with contracts, names, and figures that hinted at a dark web of corruption. "Look at this," Maria said, pointing to a name that stood out among the rest. "This person is tied to a series of fraudulent activities. If they're involved, they won't hesitate to act against you." Richard leaned in closer, his expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. "I've heard that name before. They're ruthless. We need to get this information to the authorities." "Not yet. We need to be smart about this," Maria cautioned, her instincts kicking in. "If we expose this too soon, we could put ourselves in danger. We need a solid plan first." Just as they began strategizing, a sudden commotion outside caught their attention. Maria dashed to the window, peering out to see the sleek black car from the previous day parked even closer now. The same figure emerged, this time joined by two others, all dressed in dark clothing. "We need to go," Maria said urgently, grabbing Richard's arm. "Now!" "Where?" he asked, confusion etching his features. "Anywhere but here. We have to buy ourselves some time." They moved quickly through the house, Maria leading the way. She knew they had to reach the basement, a place where they could regroup and devise a plan away from prying eyes. As they descended the stairs, Maria's mind raced. How had they found him so quickly? Was there a mole within the security team? Once in the basement, they huddled behind some old boxes, their hearts pounding in unison. "What do we do now?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We wait and listen," Maria replied, her instincts honed for survival. She could feel the weight of the situation, the shadows closing in as danger loomed ever closer. In that moment of uncertainty, she made a silent vow to protect Richard at all costs. They would find a way out of this mess together, but first, they had to outsmart the threats lurking in the dark. The basement felt cold and damp, a stark contrast to the luxury of Richard's mansion above. Maria and Richard huddled behind the boxes, their breaths mingling in the stale air as they listened intently. The muffled voices from above sent chills down Maria's spine. She knew the stakes were higher than ever. "I can't believe this is happening," Richard muttered, his hands trembling slightly. "How did they find out so quickly?" "It doesn't matter right now," Maria replied, her voice steady. "What matters is that we keep our heads down and figure out our next move. They're clearly looking for you." The footsteps above grew louder, and Maria pressed her finger to her lips, signaling Richard to be quiet. The voices grew clearer, and she could make out snippets of conversation. "They must be hiding somewhere in the house. Check every room," a man ordered, his voice cold and commanding. Maria's heart raced. She had to think fast. "We can't stay here," she whispered urgently. "We need to find another way out. There's an emergency exit at the back of the basement. It leads to the garden." Richard nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "Lead the way." They moved quietly, careful to avoid any creaks in the old wooden floor. As they approached the emergency exit, Maria's mind raced with possibilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Once outside, they ducked into the shadows of the garden, the thick foliage providing a temporary refuge. Maria glanced around, scanning for any sign of danger. "We need to get to my car," she said. "It's parked a few blocks away." "Do you really think it's safe to go out there?" Richard asked, concern etched on his face. "It's our best option right now. We can't stay here. They'll find us if we do," Maria insisted, her resolve strengthening. She led Richard through the winding paths of the garden, careful to stay out of sight of the windows. As they neared the edge of the property, Maria's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking when she saw the name on the screen. Her supervisor at the FBI. Taking a deep breath, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Maria, where are you? We've been trying to reach you," her supervisor said, the urgency in his tone unmistakable. "I can't talk right now. I'm with Richard, and we're in danger. There are people looking for him," Maria replied, her eyes darting around for any signs of movement. "Get him to a safe location. We have a team mobilized in your area," he instructed. But before Maria could respond, the line went dead. "Great, just great," she muttered, shoving the phone back into her pocket. "We have to move. Now," she urged, leading Richard through a small gap in the hedges that bordered the estate. They emerged onto the street, the cool air hitting their faces like a splash of cold water. "Where's your car?" Richard asked, looking around as if he expected an ambush at any moment. "Just a little further down the street." "Stay close to me," Maria instructed, her instincts kicking into high gear. As they hurried along the sidewalk, Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the pressure of time bearing down on them. Suddenly, a black SUV rolled by, the tinted windows hiding its occupants. Maria's breath caught in her throat as the vehicle slowed to a stop, and she instinctively pulled Richard closer to her. "Get down," she hissed, crouching behind a parked car. "What do we do?" Richard whispered, panic creeping into his voice. "Wait," Maria replied, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to let fear dictate their actions. They needed to remain calm and collected. The SUV's door swung open and two men stepped out, scanning the area with menacing gazes. Maria recognized one of them. He was the same man she had seen lurking around Richard's house the previous day. "Stay put," she whispered to Richard as she subtly reached for her concealed firearm. She knew she had to protect him, but charging in without a plan would be reckless. As the men moved closer, Maria's thoughts raced. They were here for Richard, and she couldn't let that happen. Taking a deep breath, she formulated a plan. "On my mark, we make a run for it to that alleyway," she said, nodding towards a narrow opening between two buildings. "We'll be hidden there, and I can call for backup." Richard nodded, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Okay, just tell me when." The men were almost upon them now, and Maria's heart thumped loudly in her chest. 3, 2, 1, go, she shouted, pushing Richard forward as they bolted toward the alley. Adrenaline coursed through their veins as they sprinted, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Maria glanced over her shoulder and saw the men following them, their faces twisted in determination. "Faster," Maria urged, her feet pounding against the pavement. They reached the alley and ducked behind a dumpster, pressing their backs against the cold metal. "What now?" Richard panted, glancing around, eyes wide with fear. Maria pulled out her phone, heart racing as she dialed for backup. "Just hold on. Help is on the way," she promised, hoping her voice conveyed the calm she desperately needed to feel. The shadows closed in around them, but Maria knew they were far from done. She had to protect Richard at all costs, and together, they would find a way out of this nightmare. The alley was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as Maria and Richard crouched behind the dumpster, their breaths coming in rapid bursts. Maria's heart raced, not just from the adrenaline, but also from the weight of responsibility resting heavily on her shoulders. She was not just protecting a millionaire. She was safeguarding a key player in a larger game of corruption that threatened the very foundation of the country. "Is this really the best plan?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hiding in an alley? It's not ideal, but it's what we have right now," Maria replied, glancing around cautiously. "Stay low and quiet. I need to get in touch with my team." With her heart pounding, Maria focused on the phone in her hand, tapping in her supervisor's number. The call went straight to voicemail, and frustration bubbled inside her. She couldn't afford to lose communication, especially now. They were running out of time. "Maria," Richard interrupted her thoughts, his voice strained with anxiety. "Do you really think they'll find us?" She turned to face him, her expression serious. "They're looking for you, Richard. This is bigger than just you and me. If we don't act fast, they'll have you in their clutches before we can blink." Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley. Maria's instincts kicked in. She gestured for Richard to be quiet and pressed her back against the cold, hard surface of the dumpster, straining to hear. 3 men entered the alley, their faces shadowed but their intent clear. Maria recognized the leader. He was one of the same men who had searched Richard's house earlier. "We need to split up," the leader ordered, his voice dripping with authority. "One of you stay here and check the alley. The rest of you search the nearby blocks." "Where could they have gone?" one of the other men asked, frustration seeping into his tone. Maria's breath caught in her throat. They were only a few feet away, and if they found Richard, everything would fall apart. She looked at Richard, who was pale but resolute. "We can't stay here," Maria whispered urgently. "We have to make a move." "Where do we go?" Richard asked, glancing around as if expecting a magical exit to appear. "Follow me," Maria instructed, pulling him toward the back of the alley where a fence separated them from the adjacent lot. It was a risk, but it was better than waiting to be found. As they maneuvered around the dumpster, the leader's voice cut through the air. They couldn't have gotten far. "Check the back of the buildings. They're here somewhere." "Move," Maria urged, and they dashed toward the fence. It was tall, but there was a dumpster nearby that could serve as a makeshift stepping stool. Maria climbed up first, her heart racing with every movement. She could hear the men closing in behind them. "Come on," she shouted, reaching down to help Richard up. He scrambled onto the dumpster and then over the fence, landing on the other side with a thud. They found themselves in a desolate lot, littered with debris and overgrown weeds. The air was thick with the smell of rust and neglect. Maria took a moment to assess their surroundings. "Where now?" Richard panted, scanning the area nervously. "Let's head toward the street," Maria said, pointing to a narrow gap between 2 dilapidated buildings. "We'll find a way to blend in with the crowd. Once we're on the main road, we can call for backup." They rushed toward the street, moving quickly and quietly, desperate to avoid detection. As they reached the edge of the lot, Maria could see the busy street bustling with people, an ideal cover if they could just blend in. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady, though inside she felt the tremors of fear. Richard nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. "Let's do this." They stepped onto the sidewalk, forcing themselves to act nonchalant despite the adrenaline coursing through their veins. Maria kept her head down, glancing sideways to ensure Richard was keeping pace. The crowd provided a sense of safety, but she knew it was only temporary. "Where do we go now?" Richard asked, his voice lowered to a whisper. "First, we find a public space," Maria replied. "Then, I'll call for backup. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." Just as they rounded a corner, Maria spotted a small cafe up ahead, its outdoor seating bustling with patrons. "There, let's head in there," she said, leading Richard toward the entrance. As they entered the cafe, the warmth enveloped them like a blanket, contrasting sharply with the chill of the alley. Maria quickly scanned the area, noting the exits and the patrons lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the danger lurking just outside. "Find a table near the back," she instructed Richard as she pulled out her phone, hoping this time to reach her team. The cafe was a temporary refuge, but Maria knew they couldn't stay too long. The threat was still looming, and with each passing moment, the men searching for Richard were getting closer. Come on," she muttered under her breath as she waited for the call to connect. Time was running out, and they needed a plan. The cafe was a world away from the chaos outside, but Maria couldn't let her guard down. She found a corner table where they could observe the entrance and the bustling crowd. As Richard settled into his seat, Maria continued to scan the cafe, looking for anything that could hint at danger. The barista was a young woman with a bright smile, oblivious to the tension that crackled in the air around them. "Just order something. We need to blend in," Maria urged Richard as she typed furiously on her phone, trying to get a signal strong enough to reach her team. "I'll take a coffee," he replied, but his eyes were still darting around, taking in the unfamiliar environment. The normalcy of the cafe felt surreal to them, as if they were in a movie scene. "Black or with cream?" Maria asked, glancing up for just a moment. Richard's distracted expression made her realize he wasn't paying attention. Black is fine," he mumbled. "Right, just sit tight," she said, trying to maintain an air of calm even as her heart raced. Maria knew they had to be careful. The moment they were discovered, everything could spiral out of control. After placing the order, she returned her focus to the phone. The line rang and rang, but still, no answer from her team. Frustration bubbled inside her. They were running out of time, and without support, they were vulnerable. "Are we safe here?" Richard asked, breaking her concentration. His voice was tinged with anxiety. "For now, yes, but we have to keep moving," Maria replied, keeping her tone reassuring. "As soon as I reach my team, we'll devise a plan." Richard leaned back in his chair, letting out a sigh of relief. "I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this," he said, shaking his head. "One minute I'm running my business, and the next I'm hiding in a cafe from corrupt officials." "I know it's overwhelming," Maria said, her voice low and steady. "But remember, you're not alone in this. I'm here to protect you." Just then, a figure caught her eye as he entered the cafe. The man wore a dark coat and a black hat, his features obscured by a shadow. He seemed out of place in the cheerful ambience, and Maria's instincts flared. "Richard," she whispered urgently, "keep your head down. We might have company." Richard's eyes widened as he followed her gaze. The man was scanning the room, and Maria's heart raced as she realized he was looking for them. The barista brought Richard's coffee, and Maria quickly reached for it, feigning casualness. "Is everything okay?" the barista asked, her bright smile fading as she noticed the tension between the two. "Yes, thank you. Just a little tired," Maria said, forcing a smile as she glanced over the barista's shoulder. The man was now approaching their table, his demeanor icy. "What do we do?" Richard whispered, his voice tense. "Act normal," she instructed, gripping her phone tightly. She was tempted to call for backup right there, but she didn't want to alert the man. "Mind if I join you?" the man said, his voice smooth yet chilling. "No, we're good," Maria replied, her mind racing. She had to think fast. If he was part of the corrupt network, they couldn't afford to give away their position. "Really? Because I think I've been looking for you," he said, leaning slightly closer, his gaze fixed on Richard. "You don't want to ignore someone who can help you, do you?" "Help? We don't need help," Richard retorted, his bravado faltering under the man's intense stare. "Is that so?" The man replied, an unsettling smile creeping across his face. "You're in over your head, kid. The world you're dabbling in isn't kind to those who don't know the rules." Maria felt the tension rise and decided it was time to assert control. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice firm. "We don't want anything to do with you." "Suit yourself," he said, stepping back, but not before Maria caught a glimmer of a badge hidden beneath his coat. "But don't say I didn't warn you. Things are about to get messy." As the man walked away, Maria felt her pulse quicken. "What the hell was that?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think he's one of them?" "I don't know, but we can't stick around to find out," Maria replied, standing up abruptly. "We need to leave. Now." "Wait, my coffee," Richard started, but Maria shook her head. "Leave it. We can't afford to draw attention. Just follow my lead." They slipped out of the cafe, Maria keeping a watchful eye on the entrance as they exited. The fresh air hit them like a wave, but there was no time to breathe easy. "Where do we go?" Richard asked, his eyes darting down the street as if expecting trouble to leap from the shadows. "There's a parking garage a block away," Maria replied, her mind racing. "We'll grab a car and regroup." As they hurried down the street, Maria's instincts screamed at her to stay alert. The man in the cafe was a reminder of the dangers lurking just beyond their perception. They had to stay one step ahead of their enemies, and right now, they were in a precarious game of cat and mouse. "Do you think they know where we are?" Richard asked, glancing back anxiously. "I don't know, but we can't take any chances," Maria said, determination hardening her voice. "Just keep moving." As they approached the parking garage, Maria's mind was already racing with the possibilities. They needed to find a way to outsmart their pursuers and ensure Richard's safety, but it wouldn't be easy. The game was escalating, and she had to stay one step ahead if they were to survive. Maria and Richard entered the dimly lit parking garage, the echo of their footsteps amplifying the tension that hung in the air. The scent of oil and concrete enveloped them, and for a moment, Maria allowed herself to breathe just slightly as she scanned their surroundings. They were concealed from view, but she knew that danger wasn't far behind. "Which car are we taking?" Richard whispered, his voice barely masking his anxiety. The garage was nearly empty, with only a few vehicles scattered about, their shapes blurred in the shadows. "I have a vehicle parked in the back. Follow me," Maria replied, her voice steady as she led him deeper into the maze of cars. She had planned this escape meticulously, but the presence of the man in the cafe lingered in her mind like an unwelcome shadow. "Are you sure this is safe?" Richard asked, glancing around nervously. "What if they're already watching us?" "They won't expect us to hide in plain sight," Maria assured him, her grip tightening around the keys in her pocket. "Stay close and act normal. We're just two people leaving a cafe. Keep your head up." As they approached her unassuming sedan, Maria noticed Richard's apprehension. His expression was a mix of fear and disbelief, as if he still couldn't grasp the gravity of their situation. She understood one moment he was a businessman, the next he was a pawn in a dangerous game. "Get in," she instructed, and Richard complied, sliding into the passenger seat. Maria quickly joined him, her senses heightened as she started the engine. "Where to now?" Richard asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Just drive around for a bit," Maria replied, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as she pulled out of the parking space. "We need to shake off any tails." "Great," he muttered, a hint of sarcasm creeping into his tone. "I'd really like to not get caught by corrupt officials today." Maria smirked despite the tension. "You and me both. Just keep an eye out for anything unusual." They drove in silence, weaving through the city streets, the hum of the engine blending with the rush of thoughts racing through Maria's mind. She had spent years training for situations like this, yet it was always different when the stakes were personal. Richard wasn't just a client. He was her responsibility now. As they approached a busy intersection, Maria noticed a dark sedan trailing a few cars behind them. Her heart raced as she assessed the vehicle, instincts screaming that they were being followed. "Richard," she said slowly, "I think we have company." Richard's eyes widened as he turned to look out the window. "What do we do?" "Take a right at the next light," Maria instructed, her voice calm but urgent. "We need to create some distance." They turned sharply, the tires screeching slightly as Maria accelerated. The dark sedan followed closely, the driver determined not to lose them. "Can't we just lose them in traffic?" Richard asked, panic rising in his voice. "Not if they know where we're going. We need a plan," Maria replied, her mind racing as she searched for options. "There's an alley up ahead. Turn left there." "An alley?" Richard echoed, disbelief in his tone. "That doesn't sound like a good idea." "Trust me," Maria said, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the entrance. "It's the best chance we have." They turned into the narrow alley, the darkness swallowing them as they navigated the tight space. Maria could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, heightening her senses as she kept an eye on the rearview mirror. The dark sedan had hesitated before following them into the alley. "Are they still behind us?" Richard asked, his voice tense. "Yeah, they're still on us," Maria replied, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I'm going to make a quick turn, and then we need to find a place to hide." The alley opened up slightly, and Maria took advantage of the moment. She swung the car into a parking lot that appeared mostly deserted. As they pulled into a space, she quickly scanned the area for any signs of trouble. "Now what?" Richard asked, his breath quickening. "Stay low and don't make any sudden movements," Maria instructed, her heart pounding as she watched the dark sedan pull into the alley, searching for them. "Do you think they saw us?" Richard whispered. "Possibly, but they might not know which car we took," she replied, her mind racing as she assessed their options. "If we can just wait a few moments, they might leave." They sat in silence, the tension thickening the air around them. Maria kept her eyes glued to the rearview mirror, watching for any movement. The dark sedan slowed to a stop, and Maria felt her stomach drop as the driver exited the vehicle. "Who is it?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," she said, squinting to get a better look. The driver appeared to be scanning the parking lot, and Maria's instincts flared. "We need to move now." "Where?" Richard questioned, panic rising in his voice. "There's a door at the back of the lot." "We can't stay here," Maria said urgently. "Get out and follow me. Stay low." They exited the car cautiously, Maria leading Richard toward the rear of the parking lot, her senses on high alert. She could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. As they reached the door, Maria turned the handle, finding it unlocked. They slipped inside, the darkness enveloping them as they moved deeper into the unknown. "What now?" Richard asked, glancing around nervously. "We wait for a moment, then find a way out," Maria replied, determination hardening her resolve. "We're not done yet. We'll figure this out together." As they stepped inside the dimly lit building, Maria's senses heightened. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. Richard followed closely behind her, his eyes darting around as if the shadows themselves might spring to life. The building appeared to be abandoned, with peeling paint and broken windows, an ideal refuge for their current predicament. "Is this really the best place to hide?" Richard whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "It feels like we're stepping into a horror movie." Maria chuckled softly, trying to ease the tension that had settled over them. "I promise, it's not as bad as it seems. We just need to keep a low profile until the coast is clear." She scanned the room, looking for a secure spot to wait out the potential danger. "Where do you think they are now?" Richard asked, his worry palpable. "They might still be in the parking lot or have moved on, but we can't risk it," Maria replied, moving toward a large, rusted filing cabinet in the corner. She carefully pushed it against the door, creating a makeshift barricade. "This should buy us some time." With the door secured, Maria turned to Richard, who was still visibly shaken. "Listen, I need you to stay calm. We'll figure this out together." She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. "We just need to gather more information." Richard took a deep breath, attempting to steady himself. "What's our next move? Do we call for help?" Maria shook her head. "Not yet. If we alert anyone, it could compromise everything. We have to assess the situation first." She pulled out her phone, but the lack of signal reminded her of their isolated position. "Let's find a window or a vantage point. We need to see if anyone is looking for us." They made their way to a cracked window at the back of the building. Peering outside, Maria squinted against the harsh sunlight filtering through the grime. The street appeared deserted, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Keep an eye out for that dark sedan," she instructed, her heart racing as she searched for any signs of danger. "I can't believe we're doing this," Richard muttered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to materialize from the shadows. "This isn't exactly how I imagined my day going." "Trust me, it wasn't part of my plan either," Maria replied with a wry smile. "But we have to adapt. That's the key in situations like this." As they stood there, the minutes felt like hours. Maria's mind raced with possibilities. What if the men they had seen were still searching for Richard? What if they had already reported his disappearance? She needed to devise a plan, and quickly. "Maria, what if they know we're here?" Richard's voice was barely a whisper, but the anxiety was evident. "What if they find us?" "They won't find us if we stay smart," Maria replied, her voice steady. "We need to think like them. They're probably expecting us to run, but we'll be 2 steps ahead." Suddenly, they heard a noise outside, a deep growl of an engine reverberating through the air. Maria's heart dropped. "That's the sedan," she hissed, moving away from the window. "We need to hide." They darted to a nearby room that seemed to lead further into the building. As they crouched behind an old desk, Maria could hear the low rumble of the car approaching, its tires crunching on the gravel outside. Richard's breathing was shallow, mirroring her own anxiety. "Do you think they're here for us?" he asked, fear etched on his face. "Stay quiet," Maria urged, her instincts screaming for them to remain hidden. The sound of footsteps echoed as someone exited the vehicle, followed by muffled voices that drifted through the air. "Let's move to the back," Maria whispered, gesturing for Richard to follow her. They crept toward the rear of the building, trying to avoid any noise that might betray their position. As they reached another door, Maria paused. She could hear the men discussing something, their words indistinct but laced with urgency. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice low. "If they find us—" Richard nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "What's our plan? We can't just wait for them to come looking." Maria pressed her ear against the door, listening intently. "I need to gather more information. We'll wait for them to move on, then we'll find a way out." Minutes felt like an eternity as they huddled together, the sound of their breaths barely audible over the distant chatter. Maria's mind raced with possible scenarios. Would they have to fight their way out? Or could they slip away unnoticed? Finally, the voices outside began to fade. "Let's check the building," one of the men said. "They can't have gone far." Maria's heart raced as she exchanged a quick glance with Richard. "Now's our chance," she said urgently. "We have to move." They opened the door slowly, peering into the hallway. The coast appeared clear, but Maria could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. This was their opportunity, but they had to be smart about it. "Stick close," she instructed, and they began to move cautiously through the dim corridor, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The shadows around them seemed to shift, echoing the uncertainty of their situation. Maria felt the tension building within her, the urge to protect Richard at all costs. She was prepared to do whatever it took to keep him safe, even if it meant confronting the very danger they were trying to evade. As Maria and Richard navigated the dark corridor, the echoes of their footsteps felt amplified in the silence that surrounded them. Maria's heart raced as she focused on the faint sounds of movement coming from the front of the building. The voices that had once been mere whispers now seemed to grow louder, punctuated by the sounds of footsteps approaching. "We need to find another way out," she whispered urgently, her mind racing with potential escape routes. They reached a narrow staircase leading down to the basement, its steps creaking ominously beneath their weight. "I don't like this," Richard murmured, hesitating at the top. "What if they follow us?" "They're looking for us upstairs," Maria replied, her voice steady. "We'll slip away while they're distracted. Trust me." She squeezed his shoulder for reassurance, sensing the tension radiating from him. They descended the stairs cautiously, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. When they reached the basement, Maria flicked on her phone's flashlight, illuminating the space around them. The room was filled with old furniture, forgotten boxes, and a musty smell that hinted at years of neglect. "It's like a time capsule," Richard remarked, glancing around nervously. "What are we even doing down here?" "We're buying time," Maria said, scanning the room for anything useful. "We need to figure out our next move without being seen." As she moved deeper into the basement, she stumbled upon an old service door tucked away behind a stack of crates. "This could be our way out," she said, brushing off the dust. "But we need to be quick." Richard approached the door, eyeing it warily. "Do you think it leads outside?" "There's only one way to find out," Maria replied, her determination evident. She grasped the doorknob and twisted it, feeling resistance. "Help me with this." Together, they pushed against the door, and with a creak, it swung open, revealing a dimly lit alleyway. As they stepped outside, the cool air washed over them, but it was not enough to calm Maria's racing heart. They were still in danger, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. "We need to find a car," she said, looking down the alley. "We can't stay exposed like this." Richard nodded, glancing nervously down the narrow path. "What if they see us?" "Then we'll run," Maria said, her voice firm. "We can't let fear paralyze us. We need to keep moving." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The adrenaline coursing through her veins pushed her forward, fueled by the urgency of their situation. They crept cautiously down the alley, peering around corners and avoiding any open spaces. Maria's mind raced with possibilities. If they could find a vehicle, they might be able to escape the city entirely. But they had to act fast. Time was not on their side. The distant hum of engines and the sound of footsteps echoed through the streets, reminding them that they were not alone. As they approached the end of the alley, they spotted a sleek, black sedan parked along the curb. "Look there," Richard whispered, his eyes widening with hope. "We could take that one." Maria nodded, but caution gripped her. "Let's make sure it's clear first." She motioned for Richard to stay back as she approached the car, scanning the area for any sign of danger. The windows were tinted, and the doors were locked, but she could see the keys dangling from the ignition. Her heart raced. This could be their ticket to freedom. Just as she reached for the door handle, a sudden noise behind them made her freeze. "Did you hear that?" Richard whispered, his voice trembling. Maria turned slowly, her instincts on high alert. Shadows loomed at the end of the alley, and she could make out the figures of men emerging from the darkness. "We have to go now," she hissed, urgency lacing her voice. They sprinted for the car, adrenaline propelling them forward as the footsteps grew louder behind them. Richard yanked open the passenger door and climbed in, while Maria slid into the driver's seat. "Start the car," he shouted, panic evident in his voice. "They're coming." Maria quickly turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. As she shifted into drive, she glanced in the rear-view mirror, seeing the men closing in on them. "Hold on," she yelled, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The sedan shot forward, tires screeching against the pavement as they barreled down the street. The wind whipped through Maria's hair, and she focused on the road ahead, her heart pounding with the thrill of their escape. "We did it," Richard exclaimed, laughter mingling with disbelief. "We actually made it." "Not yet," Maria replied, her gaze scanning the streets for any signs of their pursuers. "We can't celebrate until we're out of danger." As they drove through the city, Maria's mind raced with thoughts of their next steps. They needed to regroup and come up with a plan to ensure Richard's safety. But for now, they were free, at least for the moment. The weight of the danger they had narrowly escaped hung over them, but there was also a flicker of hope igniting within Maria. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the city as Maria and Richard navigated the quiet streets. The adrenaline from their escape had begun to ebb, replaced by a cautious optimism. Maria glanced at Richard, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, hoping to break the silence that had settled between them. Richard turned to her, his expression a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "I'm just processing everything," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "One minute I was living my life, and the next I was running for it." His voice trailed off, reflecting the weight of the danger they had faced. "I understand," Maria said, her voice steady. "But we need to focus on what's next. We've managed to escape, but we can't let our guard down yet. The network we're dealing with is powerful, and they won't give up easily." She felt a surge of determination as she spoke, knowing that their fight was far from over. "Right," Richard replied, his gaze sharpening with newfound resolve. "What do we do now? Do we go to the police?" Maria shook her head, contemplating their options. "We need to keep a low profile for now. Going to the authorities might put you at greater risk, especially if any of them are involved in the corruption. I have contacts I can trust, people who know how to handle situations like this. We'll figure it out together." As they drove through the city, Maria formulated a plan. "First, we need to get you out of sight. I have a safe house a few hours away. It's discreet, and I can ensure it's secure. You'll be safe there while I gather more information on this network and how to dismantle it." Richard nodded, his expression firm. "I appreciate that, Maria. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've put your life on the line for me." She shrugged, a faint smile playing on her lips. "It's my job, and besides, I'm not about to let a millionaire go down without a fight." She chuckled lightly, hoping to ease the tension in the air. They continued to drive, the city slowly waking up around them. The streets were lined with cafes preparing for the morning rush, and pedestrians began to fill the sidewalks, oblivious to the turmoil that had unfolded just hours before. Maria felt a sense of hope rising within her. They were alive, they had each other, and together, they could confront the storm ahead. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Maria pulled into a secluded area where tall trees lined the road. "This is it," she said, turning onto a gravel driveway leading to a modest cabin tucked away from prying eyes. "Welcome to the safe house." Richard looked around, taking in the serene surroundings. "It's beautiful," he remarked, stepping out of the car. "I never thought I'd find peace in a place like this, especially not after everything that's happened." Maria smiled at him, appreciating his ability to find light in darkness. "That's the spirit. This is a chance for us to regroup and figure out our next steps. You can rest here, and I'll start reaching out to my contacts. We'll gather the information we need to expose this corruption and keep you safe." They entered the cabin, the rustic charm enveloping them in warmth. Maria quickly checked the locks and drew the curtains to ensure no one could see inside. "Make yourself at home. I'll grab us some coffee and then get to work." Richard nodded, grateful for her hospitality. As he settled into a cozy chair, he took a deep breath, allowing the tension to dissipate. The enormity of their situation weighed heavily on his shoulders, but Maria's unwavering determination reassured him. "Thank you, Maria," he said, his voice sincere. "I can't tell you how much this means to me. You've risked everything to help me, and I won't forget it." "You don't need to thank me," Maria replied, pouring 2 mugs of steaming coffee. "Just focus on staying safe and recovering. We'll get through this together, I promise." As they shared a quiet moment, sipping their coffee and reflecting on the chaos they had endured, a sense of camaraderie began to blossom between them. It was clear that this was not just a mission for Maria. It had become a personal fight for both their lives. With the sun climbing higher in the sky, Maria felt the fire of determination reignite within her. They had faced the storm and emerged stronger, but the battle was far from over. Together, they would navigate the treacherous waters of corruption and seek justice one step at a time. "Let's get started," Maria said, setting her mug down with purpose. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." Richard nodded, a newfound determination lighting up his features. "I'm ready. Let's take them down." Enjoy the story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next thrilling episode. See you in our next video. Take care.